So hey there, thanks very much for checking out my videos here on YouTube. I do greatly appreciate it. So we're doing kind of an in-car thing. So I'm on my lunch break. Again, we're down at the usual Wendy's in Listowel, Ontario. And we're sitting in the parking lot of the Pioneer gas station, which is attached to the On the Run. So if you want a really good cup of coffee, On the Run has an automated robot that makes coffee. It's a Casca machine. If you're familiar with those, they're consistent almost all the time. It's very rare that you get a bad cup of coffee off the automated machine here. It's an expensive piece of equipment. They put some big money into it. So if you want a good cup of coffee in your Listowel, Ontario, and you want a consistent cup of coffee, it's usually around $2. It's pretty good. Only thing I'd recommend, bring your own cup, because the cups that they serve here are made out of cardboard, so that you get that cardboard taste in it. So if you're a coffee nut and you're kind of going, bring your little tumbler and fill it up, because it's pretty decent from that standpoint. Is it better than the local coffee shop like at Timmy's? I'd have to say yeah, it is, because they're consistent. Well, actually, that's not true. Timmy's is consistent, but they're consistent in the way you don't particularly like all the time, right? So this one seems to be every time I go in and get a dark roast, it's good. So good recommendation from there. So we're sitting out in the parking lot doing our lunch break, and I am reading through chapter 2 on the OMVIC Student Handbook Manual. So this is a vintage piece. So this is out of my library. So I did the coursework back in the day. I've since changed jobs repeatedly. I've been out of the sales force for a while, but I've had some people ask, because we're Turo related, on how do I become a wholesaler? How do I get in dealer auctions? Yada, 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 yada. It's a slippery slope. So I thought, well, you're gonna need to do an OMVIC course. Let's do some of the conversations around the OMVIC. Okay, let's do a little research and just have a conversation about how would I go about doing that, right? So we've covered chapter 16, chapter 5. I've been doing it kind of as the reasonings kind of come up. So we did chapter 16 because I bought an as-is car, the Hyundai Genesis. We went through the whole safety process, the repair work, everything along that line. So again, superb, but we thought we'd review that. Then we reviewed chapter 5, which was pretty much a topic about curbsiding cars, curbers. So again, it's in here, so we reviewed it, again, because we were shopping for cars. So check those out if you're shopping for a car and you're concerned about as-is or buying it off someone you might perceive to be curbing it, selling it without authorization or a host of stuff. Check it out. Again, they're in the video feeds down below. I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed. I'm at about 425 subscribers right now. So at 425, that's pretty impressive, considering this is a really, really narrow topic. It's essentially a hobby for me from that standpoint. So there's not a lot of people out there on the YouTube talking about the daily on being a Turo host or renting peer-to-peer cars. There's a fair bit down in the States, and I thought, you know what? Let's do a Canadian kind of version. I'm using very low budget, so just so you're aware of it, I've got the essential phone and its own microphone. So we don't have an in-car camera. We don't have a lapel mic. I'm not doing fancy editing. I'm not writing tons of scripts. I do kind of a little hot point sometimes when we're doing the live stuff, but you're getting it pretty much. It is as it is. I work a full-time job. I do a couple other little things on the side as well. Turo is an addition to that. Is it getting a little bit bigger? I'm into 2 cars now. So this is the third Turo car. So I've had the Mitsubishi Outlander, which we're in right now, 2014, available for rent in Atwood, Ontario, or Listowel, Ontario. I get a lot of folks coming in from London and from Kitchener-Waterloo area renting this particular vehicle, because it is a 7-passenger Outlander GT with the automatic transmission. That's not a CVT. We talk about that in some of the videos, and it's a nice V6. So it's a nice vehicle, leather roof, some nice toys, very comfortable. So been doing that for about over a year now. So we kept that. We talked about that in the other video, and we just put in a 2013 Hyundai Genesis. Again, we talked the process about that and why I added an additional car. So do I like Turo? Well, I have 2 cars now, so that kind of, yes, I like Turo. We did a Chevy Cruze. That didn't work out so well. we talk about why it didn't work out well in another video. So you might want to check that if you're doing the economy end of it. And we talk about cash cars law because that's what I'm doing. So let's get back to chapter 2. We're about 5 minutes in, which is kind of the norm. We did a little banter thing at the beginning. So my apologies. All my videos start out to want to be like 10 or 20 minutes. They all end up like in the 30-minute range. They seem to. So maybe we'll edit them down and make little tiny little shorts. So we had talked about who needed a license if you're at a dealership, and that was the last video. We talked about reapplying and whether or not you got declined. We also talked a little bit about the process of going through their sense of an arbitration, to go and sit down with them and kind of say, well, this is the reason why. We talk about some of the reasons why you wouldn't get your license, right? So if you're on the sales floor, it's pretty easy. If you're on the dealer end of it, a lot more hurdles to go through. If you're on the dealer support end of it, pretty straightforward too. Basically, if you're involved in the business, you really should have an OMVIC license. Regardless whether or not they tell you to, you should just do it. It's a handy little item to have in the event of some sort of legal issue they may come up down the road, or some sort of hassle, where you can kind of say, well, look, we can go to arbitration with OMVIC instead of going to court, save some time. We'll save some time and money instead of hiring lawyers. It's a good process, right? So it's one of those things where, yeah, if you're a dealership and you've got the ability to make your receptionist registered and get her done or him done, just do it. If you're got your senior detailer there and he's been there for like 5 years, and you know they want to bounce around a little bit, let them do the license, right? Just the more you have, the better off you are in the event of a problem when it comes to staffing. So let's talk about registration exemptions. We're still in chapter 2. So if you are running a wholesaler's auction, so auctions don't need to have OMVIC. Surprisingly though, every auction that I've been to is an OMVIC registered. So it's one of those things where they clearly have said to themselves, you know what, technically we don't need to. But they probably retail the odd occasional car. I would probably think that would be pretty normal. So if you are in, I would probably think a estate sale auction. I would think that you would retail out of a car occasionally. I think that would be a normal thing. Would it be an everyday event for you? No, but I think it would be one of those things where you're going to bump into somebody that's not in the auction realm, and they're going to say, geez, I'd like to buy that estate car. So I think that's the guy that would get an OMVIC license. If you're at ADESA or the bigger franchise, like the big stores, they're going to have a retail division anyways. So it's one of those things where you'll look online. Good example would be Manheim's. Manheim sells cars to the general public, but they advertise them, right? So it's one of those things where they have a retail division for retail, and they have a wholesale division for the wholesale end of it. So they do, but you don't necessarily need it. So you might find the odd occasional auction house, which is where I like to go. There's a couple of really good ones just outside of St. Jacobs, where they will have estate sales. And sometimes the estate sale will have the odd occasional nugget of gold, just some oddball car gets thrown into the mix, and they'll go through the auction block. So auctions don't necessarily need to have an OMVIC license. Wreckers. Okay, so again, every wrecker that I've been to or every scrapyard has an OMVIC license, but you don't necessarily need to have an OMVIC license. So if you're going to retail out of a car, and I've known a few scrap dealers, and what happens occasionally is they will buy a car that you go, oh, that's still a nice car. And they'll say to themselves, I would like to own it. Well, technically you own the business, that is correct, but you'd be retailing it because the business is incorporated to yourself. Technically, you should have an OMVIC license, right? So just the ease of making sure things are done properly, or you need to send the car to a wholesaler, then the wholesaler needs to sell it to you. And just paperwork is just stupid. So you just go do your sales course and you'd have an OMVIC license, and you probably just get somebody on staff to do that. So if you do find the odd occasional beautiful car, you go, well, we can just retail that. Or the other one is if you are a scrapyard with a little shop, what can happen is you will get a car in with a high retail value that requires a transmission, but it was never hit. So you will go and say, okay, well, I can pull the transmission of the car you have in the back, put into that one, and you now have a high value retail car that you want to retail because you would like to make some money. And that's where you need an OMVIC license. So do you need that if you're a wrecker? No, but you should. Selling power assist bicycles and pedal and auxiliary motor vehicles. So that is kind of a weird one. So you'll see that a lot of UK videos talk about that when they're talking their sales licensing. It's come up a few times. It hasn't come up here. It's not a big category for us. It's going to be a local issue about whether or not that's considered a vehicle that could be on the road, whether or not these have a license plate. And then if it needs a license plate, does it need insurance? If it needs insurance, you might as well just assume that if you're selling these things, you might as well get an OMVIC license. You might as well apply and have them decline you and say, no, you don't need it. But what's the worst that's going to happen? You have an OMVIC license, you're covered. Like if there's a problem, just do it. Another thing, if OMVIC allows you to get it because you have a garage registry, because you're servicing these things, it's a nice low barrier of entry to get yourself into a dealer program with an OMVIC license, is what I'm getting at. So if you're out there doing the Vespa store and it's all electric, look around. Like at some point, you're going to want to buy a van. You're going to want to go to an auction. You're going to want to deal with a wholesaler. You might as well just go do it. Again, this course is not difficult. So that's one of those things you don't need to. You're selling little electric bicycles. But think about it. Heavy truck dealers. Dealers who trade in vehicles that have gross weight of more than 21 tons and carrying the maximum permitted vehicle load, and trailers where applicable. So the heavy Mac dealers and the heavy trucks don't necessarily need an OMVIC license. Again, it's one of those situations where someone on staff usually does, but you don't need to. So if you're running a big commercial truck franchise store, you probably have OMVIC, but it's not a requirement. You probably have it because you thought to yourself, you're going to need a parts truck, or you're going to need a fleet car to run paperwork and parts around. So you're probably going to want that as like a Ferrari or a Corvette, right? You're not going to want to pay retail on those. So you're going to want to go to Odessa. So if you're a heavy truck dealer, you're going to want your OMVIC license and to be able to dabble a little bit and have a little bit of fun, because heavy truck dealers like to have fun. So get your OMVIC license, but you don't need it. Bus or commercial vehicle dealers. Okay, so a lot of this is going to be municipality. So if you are a commercial bus mechanic, or you're a commercial fleet guy, and you're running the municipal fleet, you don't need an OMVIC license. However, at the same time, again, because the ease of the licensing, it has been very common, at least everyone I've ever dealt with that have been working in the municipal level, they seem to have their licenses because they like to go to the auctions, and they like to have the option of going out and buying a cheap car. And they will occasionally, you'll see it online through government auctions, post their cars. So there is usually somebody within that corporation that has an OMVIC license. So again, don't need it, but sometimes it's there. A person selling a court order as a liquidator, receiver, trustee in bankruptcy, or so if you are the trustee of doing a bankruptcy and you're getting rid of assets because you need the money, you don't need to be licensed through OMVIC to sell that car. That's pretty normal. Most trustees don't have OMVIC licenses. I've never experienced that because they don't care. They're not buying anything. They just want to unload stuff. And again, it's one of those things where every once in a while you will see a listing that has clearly been written by a trustee. It's very, 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 very common. Most trustees now, to save the headache and the value point for them, because they may be writing off the debt anyways, usually ends up going to the lender. So a lot of times it'll be like a Scotiabank. They'll have the car, but the trustee will handle it in the interim. It'll end up going to the lender anyways. But it's one of those things where, if you're a trustee, you don't necessarily need an OMVIC license. And you might find yourself, I dealt with 2 clients that you might deal with maybe 3 or 4 cars in the year, and it's going to be toy cars. Like it won't be the bread and butter car because they're allowed to keep that, but it's one of those things where you're usually at the tail end, or you're dealing with an estate, and usually it's not that common. So it's one of those things where nobody has No one's going through bankruptcy and has equity in their Ferrari and hasn't gotten rid of the Ferrari before that, unless there was some sort of massive medical issue. So it's one of those things where it does happen, but it's pretty rare. Lawyers don't need to belong to OMVIC. Why? Because they're lawyers. That's what it boils down to. So yeah, if you're a lawyer, you don't need your OMVIC license. However, if you're a lawyer specializing in automotive, you might want to get your OMVIC license. Pair up with somebody, because you may want to get access to the auction. It's like being a dentist. They always have some sort of weird offshoot hobby. So lawyers usually do enjoy cars. At least most of the clients I've experienced, they usually do something along that line. So it's one of those things lawyers don't need to have an OMVIC license. So interesting. Car rental agencies. Car rental agencies are funny. So OMVIC doesn't, at least in my experience, they don't like car rentals. So it's not their forte. And I think it's because they're such a pain in the butt to deal with. I think that's what it boils down to. So OMVIC isn't, it's not that they're going to go out of their way to be a difficult person with you, but everyone that's ever worked for a car rental agency that I've met at auctions have always had like nightmarish stories when it comes to dealing with OMVIC, because they're not really retailers. Like they do retail their cars occasionally, but they don't even like to do it. So it's one of those things where you're getting a first year or a second year rental that's being returned, and they decide to post it up and sell it on AutoTrader or Kijiji. They've already made their money out of the car, and they're just looking at it from a standpoint of, we need to get out of it, and they don't want the headache associated with the car coming back. And because it's an ex-rental, and you're going to find that with Turo if you're doing your Turo cars, they're not really well cared for. Like, you have to stay on top of it, right? So really in that third year, you can have some problems, right? Because of the issue with selling a car under an OMVIC registration. So it's one of those things where they normally just take them to auction. So it's very, Southern Ontario, there's a couple of guys that deal in rentals, but they're usually specialty. So in other words, there's a reason why. So it was a rental car that may have been higher end. But it's one of those things that you don't usually see bread and butter stuff go through. Usually the rental agency will go, our breakup point was this. The car is going to get wholesale numbers. We've made our money on it. Now we need to recoup. And the wholesale number is the recouping number. They're usually a pretty good car to buy as a dealer, because you can represent it as an ex-rental. You can go through the service points. You can put a warranty on it. You'll see a lot of Ford dealerships are like that. Well, you see a lot of Fords that were ex-daily rentals, especially in the GTA, because they just do fleet specialties. Like, it's just the nature of it. But no, as a car rental agent, as long as you're not doing retail to retail, like, you're okay. You don't need an OMVIC license. I've never experienced buying I've never had a rental license. Like, I've never gone through OMVIC. Like, I've never gone to an auction and said, hey, I'm a rental agent. I don't know how that would work. That's interesting. I think we're going to do another video on that one. We're going to call Odessa or one of the larger auction houses and say, hey, I'm going to have because in the fourth or fifth car, I'm going to do that. What is the process to go to the auctions without an OMVIC license? Maybe that's an interesting thing to look at. We might go and do that. I've been doing government auctions. Government auctions don't care. So, non-for-profit corporations, persons to assist with trades. So again, this would be a government agency of some sort or an offshoot. That would be one of those things where you'd really want clarification with OMVIC as to whether or not you're considered a non-for-profit as registered through. That would be a question. It's probably not all cut to dry, and it even says here you have to check with the registrar to see if you actually qualify. So it's one of those things where I think they will allow you to sell the car that's there, but I don't think they'll actually you won't be able to physically go out and act as a dealer or go to dealer auctions. So not-for-profit corporations can probably get the pass on selling the car that they would have had under, let's say, a lease or a fleet agreement. So again, it's one of those little gray areas there I've never experienced, but companies acquiring vehicles for business use. So this is I've experienced this one. So a lot of times when you're in the trade, and if you're in auto mechanics, you'll be going through a fleet program, or some folks will buy into a fleet where they pay maintenance, and there's a scheduled program. It's a prepaid package they put together. It's a way of controlling costs and allowing for expenditures on what I describe as delivery guys or general contractors that do a lot of kilometers. When you're in that situation, they're going to be dealing with a fleet company. So fleet companies will sometimes go and buy the car, or they'll have the category of car to give to the actual delivery guys, to give the actual workers. In that case, they don't require an OMVIC license. Same thing when they were unloading the vehicles. They don't really need an OMVIC license to unload them. At the same time, if you are running a fleet company, it's probably not a bad idea to go ahead and get your OMVIC license if they'll allow it. And OMVIC probably would. They'd probably go, yeah, you're covering your bases, go ahead. But it's one of those things where, no, they don't necessarily need to have an OMVIC license. So, creditors and agents who have taken the lawful possession of a debtor's motor vehicle. So, yeah. I've actually talked to folks that do this. So if you're a money lender and you're using the note on the car as a collateral, you can pull the car. Same thing with a garage registry. So if you've got a garage and you've got a vehicle that ran up a huge repair bill and they've never picked it up, they abandoned the car, you don't need an OMVIC license to do that, like to pull the car and resell it. But you do need to go through the court system. In other words, you have to get that title cleaned. Doing that through the court system negates the need for OMVIC. So it's a little more than an OMVIC registry, and there's some nuances to it. But creditors don't need an OMVIC license to pull your car. They have to go through the courts. They don't need an OMVIC license to resell it. So, yeah. So if you're a lender out there, you're already experienced that. You would probably just wish for the alternative. Going through the court system is a bit of a hassle. It costs you money. The OMVIC system, not so much, but it doesn't cover the recouping costs. It doesn't cover anything. So it's one of those things where they're two different animals altogether. So manufacturers and authorized distributors. Yes. So if you own GM, good on you. If you are, actually, the one guy that will qualify for this, Elon Musk. So if you are Elon Musk, you don't need to be registered through OMVIC. At least according to the book. You probably are, though. I would assume such. So if you're manufacturing the car, you don't need OMVIC. That's essentially it. So if you feel like going out and building yourself a car manufacturing facility and building your own cars, you don't need to deal with. But I don't see why you wouldn't. Like, it seems like one of those things where you kind of go, why not? Like, it's a simple process. And inadvertently, if you end up buying and selling a car here and there, you're selling them anyways. I would probably just do it for clarification. But if you're building cars, like if you are General Motors, and that's where we talked about it in chapter 16, where new car franchises and the new cars get some passes. So in other words, there's reasons for that. Now, we're still in chapter 2. And as I said, chapter 2 is like 10% of the book. Like, it is big, whereas the other ones were like boom, 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 boom. So chapter 2, this is part 2. So we'll probably do a part 3, and part 3 is going to be on classes of dealers. We'll talk about the classes, different versions out there. We're at about 25 minutes. I do try to keep these things around the 20-minute mark, 10-minute mark. So in chapter 2, the first one I think is 30. This one's going to be 25. So, and then the next one I think will probably be another 25. So chapter 2 is the biggest bulk. But again, it's a lot of little yada yada. It's stuff you don't really need to be. Once you figure out what category you're in, whether or not you need the license, chapter 2 is pretty much done. Like, you're moving into the actual workings of what the OMVIC license is in chapter 3, and we're going to get into the other ones as we kind of go along and as time permits. So again, thank you very much for checking out my videos. I do appreciate it. They are OMVIC kind of a topic on these ones, so very narrow as far as that's concerned. I'm going to, and really, I'm not coaching you on this. All we're really doing is we're going through each chapter. I'm going to try and just relate it to say, hey, okay, this is what they're saying. This is the application that I've experienced. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. You know, I'm going by memory. I'm an older fella, so sometimes the memory isn't 100%. Sometimes the memories are better, though, than what it was. So just a little footnote there. But anyways, so I would appreciate it if you find any of this useful. Thumbs up would be great. Leave a comment would be wonderful. The other one, if you are out there and you are in the process of setting up your dealership, or you're in the process of going through the wholesaling license, and I would really like to document that. Like if you're out there and you're saying to yourself, hey, this is interesting, or if you want to just pick up the phone sometime and have a conversation and say, hey Keith, let's talk about insurance. You wouldn't believe what I went through. Or, hey, my first time at the auction was this, crazy. I'd love to hear stories like that. That'd be spectacular. Not really Turo related, but again, just fascinating to hear from. The other one is we are going to get into the nitty gritty with Turo as far as how it applies to us. And that's why we did chapter 5 and chapter 16 first, because they were buying and selling cars. So it kind of relates to Turo. And the other parts, like this chapter 2, really isn't going to be part of Turo unless you're in that 5th car purchase and you're going to yourself. In Ontario, you're allowed 4. That's what the insurance provider, and then you have to kind of get into some bizarre abstract ways of getting more cars onto Turo. There's ways to do it. If you look on Turo, you're going to find guys are running 8 and 12 cars. But it's like those cars are in my wife's name, yada, 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 yada. There's other ways around it. It's just 4 is kind of the limit. Once you're at that 5th car, after talking to my agent, my insurance agent, they kind of go, well, at that point, you're kind of in the rental business. And they're right. Like really, the time needed for 4 cars through Turo, it's not completely passive, does put you into an area where you probably should be running some systems. And if you're running systems to be efficient, well, that 4th car is probably the 5th car is probably that break point where you kind of go, I've got these efficiencies in. The time is the same for 8 as it is for 4. 8's probably pretty close to time for 12. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's one of those, so now you're into, I need parking for 4. Well, probably you're rotating out, so you're trying to keep your cars busy. You're probably at that point where, like myself, I just put them into a storage facility, but you might look and go, okay, in your neck of the woods, maybe it's easier to share a garage. At that point, you're going to go, well, if I'm going to share a garage, I might as well have commercial insurance. If I'm going to have commercial insurance, then I'm not having personal insurance on the 4, then I might as well have 8. Because it's an umbrella policy, and then the values change. And the approach to the business changes. And that's where you almost go, well, okay, well, Turo's giving me that leapfrog into a bigger business, right? And that's kind of my goal, is to say I want to get to 4. When we're at the 4th mark, we're looking at doing the 5th car, because that's what happens. I'm going to sit back and I say to myself, okay, I'm spending X amount on parking at just around the corner at Listable Storage. I'm spending X amount there. Can I take that money that I'm spending and apply it to a space that's commercial, that's close to that price point? Probably not. But it'll be one of those things where, do I buy 4 more cars? Like that would be the argument. Like if I'm at 8, then I'm kind of go, well, then maybe I do find a small little office or a small little nook someplace, or share a space with somebody, with the idea of being able to go and say, okay, now I'm into monthly leasing, or I'm into, again, Turo is more of a stepping stone. It's a great way of saying to yourself, do I want to get into the car business? It was 20 years ago, which time flies. Wow. So like 20, 15 years ago, yes, I went and got a dealer's license. Yes, I ran a small little car lot. Yes, I did in-house leasing, and yes, I did a whole host of things. But the entry level back then was relatively easy to get into in a small market. So you could say to yourself, okay, I'm going to go and give this a try. And you could fail, and you could recover from it. In today's marketplace, you really can't go out and say, okay, well, I'm going to go get a commercial building. I'm going to go get commercial insurance, because there's commercial insurance one's a real difficult one. If you have money, you can probably solve a lot of problems. But if you're just starting out there, the commercial one's real tough because they don't know you. Whereas I can go and say, hey, look, I've been doing commercial policy with Turo. Now I can go in and get a fair deal on a commercial policy with a garage attached, right? So it's an entry or starting point. Then we're into, now you need power, electricity, a phone service, then you're going to look at it. I need a desk, a chair, yada, 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 yada. I got to wash these cars. I got to service and maintain them, in which case you're into bigger commercial spaces, bigger costs, right? So again, that's where the OMVIC license could be handy on that building stage if you're in Turo. So I thank you very much for checking out. I do appreciate if you spent all the time listening to it. I do apologize about the quality, but again, more subscribers and more thumbs up, more likelihood I'm going to get into maybe better script formula. Maybe we'll go ahead and get a better camera or a better mic and go from there. But again, thanks for taking the time. I do appreciate it.